Hey everybody, Eric here from TOURNA-MIX, the ultimate mix competition website. If you like mix contests, please check us out. There's a link in the description below. We host 2 mix contests every month. It's a great way to learn, a lot of fun. Go check that out if that sounds like something you'd enjoy. You can also get free multi-tracks there, by the way. All right, so I'm here today to do another mix walkthrough of my mix of the song Why by Manfellow. This is one of the feature songs at TOURNA-MIX this month. And by the way, the deadline is June 24th in case you're watching this and you're new to TOURNA-MIX. There's still time to join. So again, head over to the site if that sounds like something that would be fun. But we're looking at my mix today. Just going to show you my mix moves. And the reason I've got this plugin pulled up, this is Tupe from Goodhertz, is because they sponsored us this month. So I thought it would be, a kind gesture to try to show off this plugin a bit. It's really, really neat. I used it as my main processor for this song. So without further ado, let's listen to a minute or so of my mix and then we'll get right into the tutorial. All right, so a really cool kind of moody rock song. Let's take a look at the mix now. So starting with the drums, this was one of the first times in a while that I've completely gutted the drums and used basically all samples. Normally I always like to use some of the acoustic kit, but in this case I decided just to go full on samples. If I pull up, like you can see they're hidden here, I've got the kick, snare, and both toms just muted and hidden here. If I temporarily unmute those, like this is what the drums sounded like. If I bring in the overheads. But the kick and snare, you could definitely work with those. I mean, they sound gated. There's not a lot of meat on them, but yeah, I mean, some of you probably use them. I decided not to for whatever reason. So I just completely sample replaced them, which gave me this sound. Here's the final mixed drums. All right, a pretty shameless sample-driven drum sound, but I thought it suited the song. The song had kind of an 80s quality, so I at least to me. So I thought maybe giving it a little bit of that big snare sound would work. So let's just take a look here at what's going on. The samples themselves didn't require much mixing, so I did use the acoustic overheads, which sound like this. Okay, that's mixed. Here they are raw. Kind of boxy. All right, so to process these, I just brought up Tupe, okay, and a compressor. That's all I used on the overheads. And real quick, again, if you don't know what this plugin is, it's saturation and EQ basically, and there's also a compressor built in. But this is your drive, this is your EQ section, and this is your compressor. You can see comp here, okay? So I'm using this basically just for a very, very small amount of drive, and then you can see this kind of typical drum EQ. I'm cutting out the low end and cutting out the boxiness. Made a big difference. So if I turn the EQ off, it sounds like this. Let me just turn all of Tupe off. So that's without EQ. Right, and that cleans it up quite a bit. You can see really, really heavy compression here, but the mix knob is dialed way back to 40%. Okay, so again, we have raw and mixed. Okay, and then we had this little room mic, which sounded kind of lo-fi. Yeah, I didn't actually do anything to it, and I kept it really low. So that's where we're at so far. Right, and then again, the rest was really just samples. So if we listen with everything playing now again. Yeah, and that was, basically the sound that I came up with. So I used 2 different kick samples. We got this guy here, combined with this really roomy one. Okay, which I actually lowered 3 dB just before making this tutorial. That was the kick. Here's the main snare sample. And I brought in another one just for a little more kind of warmth. that one there. And I also used just like a room kind of ambient sample as well. So it's the snare. And then the full drum mix again. Okay. So, you know, in terms of processing, there wasn't really a lot to do because the samples were, you know, they come to us, you know, already kind of sounding really great. You know, like I did do some processing on the snares, you know, a little bit of compression. See that compressor, just, you know, just keeping it pinned down a bit. I've also got Tupe brightening. I turned Tupe off, just a little duller. And then the drum bus as well, same kind of thing. Like I just added a little bit of compression and a little bit of EQ with Tupe. Okay, so we got this kind of thing happening. A little bit of a high shelf, super gentle compression, and some drive. So this drive is going to kind of hammer down some peaks a little for me and add, you know, just a little bit of extra grit. But again, when you're using, you know, samples like this, there's just not a lot to do. You know, the only real track that I processed in any, you know, meaningful way was the overheads. But I thought it gave me, you know, it gave me a sound that I was pretty happy with. So that's it for drums. And if you're wondering which samples those were, I just got the new Heavy Hitters sample pack from Drumforge. I'm pretty sure that's what I used for these. Yeah, you can see here I've got this Drumforge Heavy Hitters. You know, I just picked some samples that I thought worked there. Let me bring in the bass now. All right, now there wasn't a lot to do this bass. I mean, I used Tupe again, which we're going to be looking at a lot here. So the raw bass, if I turn these guys off, it sounded fine, but it was very clean. Right? It's fine, but I just wanted to add a little bit of grit. You can see I'm pushing up quite a bit of drive here with Tupe. I'm doing a high pass at 70 Hertz, and I'm compressing the... actually, this is interesting. If you didn't see my full tutorial on Tupe, when you set this compressor to SAT mode, you can see here there's different modes, pre, between, post, and SAT. What this means is it compresses the signal that feeds the saturation. It doesn't compress the actual signal itself. It just compresses like what the saturation is seeing. So this leads to a very even type of saturation. So here's with Tupe. You can hear a bit of grit. That's kind of clean. Right, and that's kind of keeping it pinned down a bit more, right? And then I'm using, you know, this Pro Q3 just to kind of sidechain with the kick a bit. Sort of, you can see this is where the kick and the bass overlap. You know, oldest trick in the book, just do a little sidechain technique there, and that keeps them kind of happy. I don't always do this, but sometimes it's a really, really good technique. So again, this is the drums and bass. I'm just noticing now, I never actually even compressed the bass, but if you look at the waveform, you know, it doesn't really need any major compression, and this saturation that I add would kind of compress it. But actually, normally I would probably add L1 to this. I was probably just in a hurry when I did this, but I would normally probably just limit this. Let me just add that now. All right. And we have our rhythm section. Then there was all these little kind of loops and stuff like that. I didn't really do much to them other than use Tupe to kind of crush them down a little bit. So Tupe can be used, you know, as a clipper in a way, because it can smash down the transients for you. So for example, this little guy here, if I mute Tupe, if we just watch the peak value down here, we're at about -15, okay? Now with Tupe, with quite a bit of drive, we're down to -22, okay? So that's 7 dB of kind of clipping and saturation to just lower down the peaks. And you can see here, that's what I did on all of these here. I did actually use K-clip, okay, on some of them. Okay, this is just more of a traditional clipper. Sometimes when I use Tupe as a clipper, it's just a little too colored, right? Whereas K-clip tends to be more of like a clean, you know, it doesn't affect the sound at all. So I just use those guys to hammer down all the peaks on these loops. Okay. I also added a little filtered effect on the intro loop here, like this guy. Right. I did this instead of. Okay. But then when the band kicks in, you can see I've actually split these tracks. These were originally on one track. And when the band kicks in, I drop the filtered effect. So it ends up kind of, I found it was too boxy once the band kicked in. So it does this. okay? That's when the drums drop. So, you know, that's all there was for the loops. There wasn't really much to show there. They all, you know, they were all kind of processed already for us and sounding kind of cool. So I didn't really do too much to them. So here's where we're at again. Right, we got like these kind of things. That guy there. Again, just using Tupe to hammer down the peaks. You can see it's at 100% drive here. Okay. All right, let's bring in the guitars. All right, so here's the main rhythm guitars. All right, so I added a bit of reverb. This Send 42 is to a basically like a 2-second plate reverb. And then, you know, I used some Tupe to high pass at 116. I also drove it right into, these are like your various different tube modes and tape modes, okay? So I just chose a few that I thought sounded good. And probably I'm also compressing. Yeah. So in this case, I've got the compressor in pre-mode. This means before everything. So rather than in saturation mode, which is what I had in the other example. So let's hear that again. Here they are raw. They sound great. My processing didn't change the sound too much. It just kind of tightened up the low end a bit and added some extra grit. One thing I found that I had to do on these electrics is a little bit of de-essing using this guy here from Slate on some of the fret squeaks. So if I open up my automation lane here, you can see on the right guitar there were some little. You can see what I've done here. There are some little fret squeaks here that. I don't know, they're not a big deal, but they were kind of bothering me. Like if I turn that de-esser off, just listen to this. Those are kind of poking out of the mix. So these are just little details you kind of have to keep your ear on. Here it is with the de-esser. Subtle, but it kind of, in context, it wasn't bothering me nearly as much with that on. So that was the main rhythms. And, you know, in any rock song, this is like the heart and soul of any rock song is your drums and your bass and your rhythms. So that got things going. Let's hear that again. I just high passed that lead guitar. I didn't really feel there was much else that needed to be done. Again, I can tell I was in a rush here. I probably would normally add a limiter or a compressor to that, but it didn't really need it, so I just left it. All right, let's hop over to the vocals now. There's a whole bunch of other little tracks here, but there's not a lot that's exciting to show here. I mean, really, like some of this stuff is just like a high pass. You know, I got a limiter on one little tiny vocal. Let's get to the main vocals here because, you know, that's the next most important thing in the song, or maybe the most important thing in the song. Let me unmute those and we'll just have a quick listen again, fully mixed. All right, so without the synths playing, you know, you can really hear the effects. But as we'll see in a minute, once all the other instruments are in, you don't really hear it. So let's just focus on this main vocal. It was kind of like an octave, a main vocal with an octave. So we got this kind of thing happening. So much for today. My world has been so hectic. All right, so this vocal shipped to us with some effects baked into it, which is never ideal, but it didn't really end up mattering that much. I just kind of washed over it with some more effects. So using Tupe here, I've got this, you know, big EQ job here, a big high pass at 239, and then a really, really big high shelf starting at about 2K. So this was like the main thing. I'm also compressing it pretty hard and driving it really, really hard. So if I turn Tupe off, okay, we've got, this is our kind of starting sound. Let me turn my effects off. Let me just turn everything off right now. So this is totally raw. So much for today. You can hear that reverb on it. My world has been so hectic. So that's already a pretty good vocal sound. With Tupe, it really, really thinned out the sound. So much for today. My world has been so hectic. That's raw. Rain is turning blue. Okay, back on. It seems it's Yeah, it's funny in solo the saturation that I added sounds kind of bad and kind of over the top, but in context you don't really hear that. All right, so that's what I did. Just again the EQ job, the saturation with this tube and tape, and then some compression. And this time the compressor is set to post, which means it's happening after the saturation. All right, so very powerful plugin. Then I'm just limiting it and adding a little bit of soothe.
Aggravating, angers run my day. Of Monday, yeah, so many.
Now, part of the reason why I thinned out that vocal so much is that we had this low one below it, right?
Has been so hectic.
So because it's filling out that lower register, I didn't really feel like all this information below 240 hertz was necessary. So you always got to think in context, right? If there hadn't been this vocal, I might not have done nearly as much to that other one. So let's hear these two again.
Rainy, sunny, blue. It's aggravating.
And this one here was just sort of a similar thing. I think I just copied over the settings from the other vocal. So that's all I did there. And then I did add some of my own effects here. You can see I've got 2 sends on the vocal here. This is basically just sending to a plate reverb and a stereo delay. So if I solo up this guy again, we've got this kind of thing happening.
So much for today.
Here's my plate. It's from Slate. And then this guy. This is from Valhalla. It's a tape delay, stereo tape delay. And, again, it sounds kind of over the top in solo. And it even sounds over the top without the instruments. If I bring everything back in here, let's see how those effects blend in. Yeah, it's always so interesting listening in context. You don't hear those effects nearly as much, and I quite like them. And that really aggressive saturation, you also don't really hear that in a negative way anymore, right? So like that starting opening vocal here, listen to this again in solo.
So much for...
Like that S sounds pretty mangled. I don't really think you hear that with everything playing though.
So much for today.
To me, it just sounds like a totally normal S. So again, context is everything. Okay, and then real quick, this main synth, all I did with this is just a little bit of EQ. So I can turn the EQ off here with this little filter knob. So this is raw. Just perks it up a little bit, right? Very small change. And then the other main synth was this guy here. So this is raw. It's just a little boomy. Just rolling off the low end and saturating the crap out of it. All right, and that's pretty much it for this mix. Now on Mixbus, let's just go back to the start here. I'm using my old faithful here, SSL. I got some Tupe going, and I've got the Rule Tech, which I love, and Clairphonic. So let's quickly take a look at those. All right, so we've got a 10 millisecond attack, a 4 ratio, and a sidechain filter set to about 180. This is my default. Feel free to try that out on your next mix. I really can't recommend using a sidechain filter enough. Really helps the low end breathe. Mild saturation with Tupe. Okay, just very mild. And then some pretty big EQ. You can see for yourself here. We've got your typical low end move with Pultec, pushing up and down. With the low end and also pushing up and down with the high end, just that Pultec thing. Okay, and then cutting a bit of mud at 500, and that's about it. And then Clairphonic, and this is the thing that made the biggest difference to the tone. So let me just play the mix. So you can see not crazy compression, 1 or 2 dB. Let me turn the 2 EQs off though, and I'll show you how dark that gets. Now that doesn't sound bad, but this really perks it up, and actually it's the Clairphonic is the one that really perks it up. So let's hear it with the Pultec now. Yeah, this one really fills in the low end and just adds a bit of crispiness. Now let's try the Clairphonic. Here's the bypass here, so I'll start with it bypassed. This is a very, very powerful plugin. I have been using it less lately, but when it works really, really well. So that was my mix bus processing. And then finally, just for some really quick mastering, I clipped the entire mix by, actually 3 dB. That's quite a bit. I didn't hear any, negative distortion or anything, but normally I try to limit it to about 2 dB. But hey, it's whatever works. And then, just some final limiting. Now, I've got a gain plugin here that's lowering my whole mix by 12 dB just so I can talk over it. But if I put this multimeter, which is before that gain plugin, you can see that I'm hitting a nice, healthy, loud level here. Let me just play this here. So watch the meter here, okay, and then watch the limiting. Yeah, so hitting, probably -8, maybe -8.5 LUFS in that little rockout section. I think the bridge got down to -7, I can't remember. But anyway, that's usually where I tap out for mastering because I'm not really a mastering engineer. I just like to hit about -8 usually. Sometimes they go louder. But I was able to do that with minimal limiting. You could see it's about 2.5 dB, maybe 3 on certain peaks. And that's largely due to the clipping, right? This guy here and also the clipping that I did on some of the tracks. So there we have it. That's the full mix. And, I hope you guys enjoyed mixing this song. I'm sure you did. It was a lot of fun to mix this one. Again, if you're watching this for the first time or watching one of my videos for the first time and you want to join this mix contest, go check us out. Follow the link in the description below. We are open till the 24th of June this month for this contest. And we also have another one going on. So hop in anytime. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. We'll talk soon. Take care.